Hello everyone, this is CAT 2023 slot 1, the VARC section. Let us quickly take a look at what the paper was all about. So of course there were 4 passages in this exam. The first passage was 537 words in length. It was about wolves in France. So the tussle between the wolves and the farmers. And the density grade was 6.7. Genre, of course, environmental humanities, and the source was The Economist. The questions, of course, there were 3 detailed questions and 1 inference-based question. The second passage in this VARC section was impact of the original affluent society, the essay. 498 words, 10.1 was the density grade, so it was slightly dense. Philosophy was the genre, and the source was publicbooks.org. And then, of course, the questions, there was 1 detailed question and 3 inference questions. The third passage was based on literature that is based in and around the Indian Ocean, as opposed to literature that is otherwise. This one was, again, 506 words. The density grade was 8.5. The genre was literary criticism. And the passage was picked from conversation.com for novelist One Ocean. So there's this very beautiful article which you could have picked up. Questions, of course, 1 was a detailed question and there were 3 inferential questions. Geographic determinism was the 4th topic, 481 words. So average for 490, 500 words is what the length of the passages was. The difficulty grade was also not very high. So the highest difficulty grade was this 4th passage, which was 11.6. So in terms of readability, the passages were fairly readable. It was not that any of the passages you would have found them very difficult to read. The passages, all of them, in fact, were fairly readable. The toughest, of course, was the 4th passage. The easiest, of course, was the wolves and in France and farmers, that one. This one was from geography. The source, of course, jareddiamond.org, and the passage was on geographic determinism. There were 2 detailed questions and 2 inference questions in this set. Let's also look at the verbal ability. Now, the verbal ability section had thrown a surprise in the sense that odd sentence out made a comeback into the paper. Last year, we did not have any odd sentence out questions. So this year, again, there were 2 questions on odd sentence out, 2 questions on sentence placement, or what you call the para completion. There were 2 questions on para jumbles, and there were 2 questions on para summary also. Now, the passages, of course, as we go along, we will take a look at what they were about. But the sources, of course, sentence placement was from Eureka Alert and Philosopher's Magazine. Odd sentence was from NOBA. And the second passage, we were not able to really pick out the source. Parajumble was Guardian and California Management Review. And the 4th one was the para summary sets were from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and UNESCO. So that were the sources of the passages in the verbal ability section. Let's now look at the first passage in this set and try and understand it a little bit in detail. So here is for questions 1 to 4, your first passage. Let's take a look at a little bit of the detail also. So in this slot 1, the first passage was RC, which was wolves in France and the problems that the farmers are having with them. Now, the number of words were 537. The Flesch-Kincaid grade level was 6.7, which meant it was a fairly easy read. The level of vocabulary was very easy to understand. The clunkiness of the passage was very, very low. It was a very easy, smooth reading passage. The source was from The Economist, and the genre or the area of study was environmental humanities. There were 4 questions only. Like I said, 3 questions from the details and 1 question was an inferential question. So this was in all a very doable passage. So if you had picked this one, which ideally you would have if you have gone through the paper very quickly before you begin it, which is what we recommend, that before you start off the paper, you should take a look at the entire section, understand which passages you're going to be doing. Then in that case, this was a passage that you would have definitely picked. It was fairly easy to read and the questions were also fairly easy. So let's take a look at the questions and let's understand the passage and then thereafter solve the questions also. So residents of Lozère, a hilly department in southern France, recite complaints familiar to many rural corners of Europe. So people of this place, Lozère, are complaining. They are reciting these complaints which are familiar to many rural corners of Europe. So that means this complaint is coming from many places of Europe. Okay. In remote hamlets and villages, hamlet is a very small village in some remote isolated area with names such as La Bacon and La Bacon View, mayors grumble about a lack of local schools, jobs, or phones and internet connections. So in these very remote villages you have where the mayors and the people are complaining that they don't have schools, they don't have jobs, they don't have phones, they don't even have internet connection. So that means they're lacking in a lot of resources. Farmers of grazing animals add another concern. So here is what we are now talking about, the return of wolves. So the mayors are complaining about lots of amenities. The farmers have another problem that the wolves have come back. Eradicated from France last century. Eradicated means completely disappeared. They were no longer there. The predators are animals which attack other animals, are gradually creeping back to more forests and hillsides. So they're coming back. The wolf must be taken in hand. Must be taken in hand means they must be controlled, said an aspiring parliamentarian, Francis Palombi, when pressed by voters in an election campaign early this summer. Tourists enjoy visiting a wolf park in Lozère, but farmers fret over their livestock and their livelihoods. So here we are. Our concern is that the wolves are back, right? And who is worried about it? It is the farmers. Okay. Are the tourists worried? No, the tourists are fairly happy. They're coming to the wolf park to see the wolves. The farmers are worried about their livestock and their livelihoods. They're worried that they may not be able to, keep the animals, keep their livestock and do more farming. So that's the concern of the farmers that we have talked about in the first paragraph. As earlier as the 9th century, the Royal Office of the Lupari, wolf catchers, was created in France to tackle the predators. Those official hunters and others completed their job in the 1930s when the last wolf disappeared from the mainland. Active hunting and improved technology such as rifles in the 19th century, plus the use of poisons such as strychnine, later on caused the population collapse. So, in the 19th century, you had created this job, the office of the Lupari. So these wolf catchers were, hired. A post was created. The catchers were hired. Their job was to tackle the wolves. But by 1930, this job had finished. Why? Because the wolves had disappeared. So hunting and improved technology, also poison, caused the wolves to die. But in the early 1990s, the animals reappeared. So in 1990s, the animals have come back. They crossed the Alps from Italy, upsetting sheep farmers on the French side of the border. So where are these coming from? They're coming from Italy. Okay, so in France, they've died, so they start coming in from Italy. Wolves have since spread to areas such as Lozère, delighting environmentalists who see the predator's presence as a sign of wider ecological health. Farmers who say the wolves cause the deaths of thousands of sheep and other grazing animals are less cheerful. They grumble that green activists and politically correct urban types have allowed the return of an old enemy. So in the second paragraph, we talk about the Lupari. Their jobs were created from the 9th century to 1930s. Okay, these guys were catching wolves. 1930s to 1990s, the wolves had disappeared, right? And thereafter, 1990 onwards, the wolves come back and they come from Italy. Okay. And now they're all over France. And what is the problem? The environmentalists are happy. Okay, again, in the first paragraph, the tourists were happy. Here, the environmentalists are happy. The farmers, again, are concerned. They're thinking of all the sheep that have died, right? So, we are again coming back to the concerned farmers. Let's look at the third paragraph. Various factors explain the changes of the past few decades. Rural depopulation is part of the story. In Lozère, for example, farming and a once flourishing mining industry supported a population of over 140,000 residents in the mid-19th century. Today, the department has fewer than 80,000 people, many in its towns. As humans withdraw, forests are expanding. In France, between 1990 and 2015, forest cover increased by an average of 102,000 hectares each year, as more fields were given over to trees. Now, nearly 1/3 of mainland France is covered by woodland of some sort. The decline of hunting as a sport also means more forests fall quiet. So now see the problems, why this has happened. Okay, the factors why the wolves are increasing. Number one, there is a decline in rural areas. So rural population of humans has declined. Okay. So forests have increased. That is the second problem. Okay. The third thing is that decline of hunting as a sport has also happened. So people earlier were hunting these animals. Now they're not. Okay. In the mid to late 20th century, over 2 million hunters regularly spent winter weekends tramping in woodland. Tramping means walking about here and there, seeking boars, birds, and other prey. Today, the Fédération Nationale des Chasseurs, the national body, claims 1.1 million people hold hunting licenses, though the number of active hunters is probably lower. So very few hunters now. The mostly protected status of the wolf in Europe, hunting them is now forbidden, other than when occasional culls are sanctioned by the state. Culling means mass killing. Plus, the efforts of NGO to track and count the animals also contribute to the recovery of wolf population. So, because you're no longer killing the wolves, so therefore the numbers have gone up. As the lupine means wolf, okay. As the lupine population of Europe spreads westward, with occasional reports of wolves seen closer to urban areas, expect to hear of more clashes between farmers and those who celebrate the predator's return. So you're going to be seeing fights between farmers and those who love the wolves. So the wolves supporters, there are going to be clashes between them. Farmers' losses are real, but are not the only economic story. Tourist venues such as parks where wolves are kept and the animals spread is discussed, also generate income and jobs in rural areas. So again, we come back to the economic factor that it is not just the farmers who are facing losses, but the tourist industry is facing benefits. So therefore, some people will find it good, some people will find it bad. So you have positives, you have negatives also. So that's the passage all about wolves and how the farmers are very unhappy about the wolves coming back. And yet tourism is an industry that is probably happy about the wolves. The NGOs are happy, tourism is happy, the environmentalists are also happy. Let's take a look at the questions. So question number 1. Which of the following has not contributed to the growing wolf population in Lozère? So a decline in the rural population of Lozère, the granting of protected status to wolves in Europe, the shutting down of the royal office of the Lupari, and an increase in woodlands and forest cover in Lozère. Now let's take a look at this question. Now, whenever you have questions which are fact-based, ideally you should always just go back to the passage and check, right? Now the question says, which of the following has not contributed to the growing wolf population? That means the other options will talk about contributing to the growing wolf population in Lozère. So let's find out all the things that say that the population of the wolf has grown, and those were mentioned in this third paragraph very clearly. So various factors explain the changes of the past few decades. Now we had said very clearly that there has been rural depopulation, right? Take a look. Rural depopulation is part of the story. So therefore A is something that has contributed, right? And therefore I will write contributed, and I'm going to cut this out. Okay, I'm striking it out. Look at 2. The granting of a protected status to wolves in Europe. Pay attention, the mostly protected status of the wolf in Europe. Hunting them is now forbidden. Do you see this portion here? The second last line of the third paragraph, right? So this also contributes to the increase in the number of wolves. So therefore, I'll cut this out also. The shutting down of the royal office of the Lupari. Now, the shutting down of the royal office of Lupari happened because the wolves had disappeared, right? So this cannot contribute to the growing population in Lozère, right? So I will therefore put a star on this, or I'll just leave it for a moment. I'll come to option 4. An increase in woodlands and forest cover in Lozère. Now again, this was also mentioned here. As humans withdraw, the third line, forests are expanding. Now in France, between 1990 and 2015, forest cover increased and so on. So all of this is mentioned here very beautifully. So therefore, again, I will say that 4 is something that has contributed. And if 4 has contributed, then again, it cannot be the right answer. So we come to 3 as our right answer. Okay. So I hope you've been able to understand. Very easy question, very doable. Question number 2. The inhabitants of Lozère have to grapple with all of the following problems except. Okay, so let us find out all the problems that they have to grapple with. Whatever will remain will be the correct answer, right? So let's take a look. So we had spoken about the people of Lozère in the very first paragraph, right? 2-3 lines, these were that they were mentioned. So they have to grapple with livestock losses. Yes, the farmers had said that, we had said that, right? That farmers fret over their livestock and their livelihoods. So they are grappling with this. So I will write grapple here, and I'm going to strike it out because remember the question is saying except. Okay. They are grappling with poor rural communication infrastructure. Yes, we've said that mayors grumble about a lack of local schools, jobs, phone and internet connection. So phone and internet connection, yes, so they're grappling with this also. So again, I'm going to strike this out. Lack of educational facility, yes, they said a lack of local schools here. Do you see that? Lack of local schools. So therefore, 3 is also something that they're grappling with. So I'll write grapple here, and I'm going to strike this out again. So therefore, automatically 4 becomes the correct answer. And also, this is not mentioned as something that the people of Lozère have to grapple with. And therefore, 4 will be the correct answer. Again, this was also a very fact-based question, very easy and very doable. So definite question that you should have done. Look at question number 3. Now, question number 3, the author presents a possible economic solution to an existing issue facing Lozère that takes into account the divergent and competing interests of. So he is talking about what is the problem. The problem that Lozère is facing is economic. The farmers are facing losses, right? The farmers are clearly facing losses, but who are they tussling with? Are they tussling with the NGOs, the environmentalists, who say it's okay that you are facing these losses? Okay, so the problem is that the author is presenting a possible economic solution to an existing issue that Lozère is facing that takes into account the divergent and competing interests of. So please understand this question very clearly. The question here is saying that there are two parties that have divergent and competing interests, and the author is probably giving you a solution to a problem that Lozère is facing. And he is taking into account the divergent and competing interest of these two groups. Now, where have we talked about the problem solution? We have said that if you wish to, what is the wolf doing? The wolf is causing losses to the farmers, but the wolf is also being profitable, and being profitable to whom? To the people there. So tourist venues, tourist locations are generating income and jobs in rural areas. So who are these two groups that are fighting? It is the farmer versus who? Farmer versus the people who are fighting for environment, the people who are taking care of the ecology, right? So people who are, so therefore, who are these two people that we are fighting? Is it environmentalists and politicians? Well, politicians haven't been mentioned at all. So one cannot be the answer. Tourist and environmentalists, again, they do not have divergent interests. Farmers and environmentalists, yes, they have divergent interests. The farmers want the wolves to go away. The environmentalists want to keep the wolves. So therefore, 3 shows you two parties whose interests are divergent. Politicians and farmers, well, farmers was something that we are worried about, but politicians, not really. So therefore, 4 cannot be the correct answer. Okay. So here the correct answer had to be option 3. Okay. So I hope you've been able to understand this question. This was a slightly tricky question. All you had to do was you had to look for which two parties are fighting about the wolves, right? Which two parties are fighting about the wolves. So I knew that on one side it was the farmers. On the other side, it was the people who were happy that the wolves were coming back. So who was happy? People who were benefiting from it, or people who were looking for the general good. So it was either people who were doing business out of the wolves or the environmentalist. And therefore, the environmentalist made a lot of sense in this answer. Let's look at question number 4. Which one of the following statements, if true, would weaken the author's claim? Okay. Now, what is the author's claim? The author's claim here it can be, the author's claim here can be seen in the very last line of the passage, where it says, farmers' losses are real, but are not the only economic story. And then he says, tourist venues such as parks where wolves are kept and the animal spread is discussed also generate income and jobs in rural areas. So what he's saying here is that these tourist venues can be very beneficial. So what he's saying essentially, or what his claim is, that wolves are a kind of a mixed blessings. Okay, they are sort of a mixed blessing. And if they are a sort of a mixed blessing, then clearly to weaken it, we could say that no, they're not a mixed blessing, they're definitely harmful. Okay. So therefore, if any option says that the wolves are really harmful, then we will be able to weaken this statement. So all I had to do was look for an option that said that wolves were harmful. The minute I got that option, I knew it had to be my answer. So take a look. The old mining sites of Lozère are now being used as grazing pasture for sheep. Well, the problem here, this is actually irrelevant. Why is it irrelevant? Because how does it weaken the claim that the wolves are a mixed blessing? It doesn't. And therefore, one is irrelevant for us. Look at 2. Wolf attacks on tourists in Lozère are on the rise. Now, if we were using the wolves as an attraction in the tourist park and the wolves start attacking the tourist, then aren't they proving to be harmful? They are. And therefore, 2 is something that will definitely weaken the author's claim that wolves are a mixed blessing. So therefore, 2 sounds like a good answer. Look at 3. Unemployment concerns the residents of Lozère. Now, if the people of Lozère are worried about the unemployment and tourist venues are generating income and job, then this one is saying that wolves are good, right? So this actually is proving the author's statement to be true. So it is in a way strengthening our author's statement. And therefore 3 cannot be an answer. Having migrated out in the last century, wolves are now returning to Lozère. Again, has nothing to do with our, author's argument or author's claim here. So therefore, 4 again is irrelevant for us. It is out of context where the wolves are for us. So we'll eliminate. So the best answer here is going to be option 2. Okay. I hope this was, you were able to understand this one. Thank you so much. We'll shortly go to the next passage. So let us look at the second passage for slot 1 for CAT 2023, questions 5 to 8. Let's first understand what the passage was all about. This was talking about the impact of the original affluent society thesis. Number of words were 498. The flesh kincaid grade level was 10.1, so slightly more difficult. Source was publicbooks.org. The genre was philosophy. There were 3 interpretation questions and 1 detailed question. So if you were going to do this, you would have to spend a bit of time on this passage and solve it by first reading it carefully and then looking at the interpretative questions in greater detail. So that was something that you had to pay attention to and that you had to do very, very carefully. Let's now look at the passage, understand it, and then try and solve the questions. So 50 years after its publication in English in 1972 and just a year since Marshall Sahlins himself died, we may ask, why did his essay, Original Affluent Society, have such an impact and how has it fared since? So there is this essay that Sahlins had written. It's been 50 years now and we're wondering why did it have such an impact and what has happened after this guy died. Sahlins' principal argument was simple but counterintuitive. So it was very easy, but it was counterintuitive, means it was self-defeating. Before being driven into marginal environments by political power, hunter-gatherers or foragers were not engaged in a desperate struggle for meager survival. So his argument was very simple, that before they were sent into, the margins of the society by colonial powers, hunter-gatherers or foragers, people who hunt for their food, they were not struggling for survival. Okay, quite the contrary. They satisfied their needs with far less work than people in agricultural and industrial societies, leaving them more time to use as they wished. So the hunter-gatherers, the foragers, were doing much less work than the people in agricultural and industrial society. They had more time to do whatever they wanted to. Hunters equipped kept bankers' hours. Refusing to maximize, many were more concerned with games of chance than with chances of game. So they were easy. They were living an easy life. The so-called Neolithic revolution, rather than improving life, imposed a harsher work regime and set in motion the long history of growing inequality. So now the first paragraph talks about Sahlins' theory, which was the original affluent society, in which he said that the foragers were living a very relaxed life. They were not struggling. Okay, they had a relaxed life. They were not struggling. They were living a good life. The minute the Neolithic revolution came, so the agriculture age, the industrial age came, people had to start working. They had to work far more. So the Neolithic revolution then just was something that did not add to their life, it rather took away from their life. So the agriculture society, the industrial society actually had to work much more than the hunter-gatherers. So sort of a very negative situation for anything that or anyone who came later. Okay. Look at the next one. Moreover, foragers had other options. So they had other things to do. The contemporary Hadza of Tanzania, who had long been surrounded by farmers, knew they had alternatives and rejected them. So they had farmers, they could have become, they were seeing farmers, they could have had other choices, but they did not. To silence, this showed that foragers are not simply examples of human diversity or victimhood, but something more profound. They demonstrated that societies make real choices. So this was very, very important. Okay. Culture, a way of living oriented around a distinctive set of value, manifests a fundamental principle of collective self-determination. So what he's saying is that culture, what is culture? There is a set of values that you have. Based on those values, you live a certain life. And because of that, there are certain principles that you determine by yourself. The group determines, the society determines that this is how we are going to live. And that becomes a culture. Okay. So in the second paragraph, we say that foragers had options, right? And they rejected those options. They decided that their culture was going to be that of, self-determination. They would define what culture they would have, and once they defined what culture they would have, they went with foraging very happily, right? So that's the second paragraph. But the point of the essay is not so much the empirical validity of the data. They're not checking the data per se. The real interest for most readers, after all, is not in foragers either today or in the Paleolithic, but rather its conceptual challenge to contemporary economic life and bourgeois individualism. So what he is saying is that why are we even looking at this essay? What is the importance of this essay? Right? Is the importance of the essay or the relevance of the essay that Sahalins has written, is it about the validity of the data? Are we checking whether the data was right? Or is it the fact that we want to see if this fits our notion of contemporary economic life? What is life going to be for us, right? So modern or contemporary economic life, how does this theory fit into that? The empirical served a philosophical and political project, a thought experiment, and a stimulus to the imagination of possibilities. So the data that we were getting had a point. The point was one, philosophical, two, it was political. Okay, there was a project, there was an experiment, and it was trying to give you all the possibilities that you could have. With its titles nod towards the affluent society, economics John Kenneth Galbraith's famously skeptical portrait of America's post-war prosperity and inequality, and dripping with new left contempt for consumerism, the original affluent society brought this critical perspective to bear on the contemporary world. So now see, this article, the one that we are talking of, the original affluent society, is a sort of a comment towards the affluent society, which was written in 1958 by John Kenneth Galbraith. So he has written, so Galbraith had created this portrait of America's post-war prosperity, that they were prosperous, the society was unequal, and it was very contemptuous for consumerism, for the capitalistic society. So this essay by Sahalins, the original affluent society, brought this critical perspective on the contemporary world. It did so through the classical anthropological move of showing that radical alternatives to the reader's lives really exist. So now we understand in the fourth paragraph that the original affluent society is a comment. Okay, it is a comment on what? The affluent society, right? Which was written in 1958. And he's telling you that the capitalist world may not be as good as we want to, and that you do have a choice. There is a radical choice that is available. If the capitalist world seeks wealth through ever greater material production to meet infinitely expansive desires, the desires are expanding, the foraging societies follow the Zen road to affluence. They're like, let's relax, let's chill. Not by getting more, but by wanting less. So you can want less. Okay. And that is what the foragers are doing. If it seems that foragers have been left behind by progress, this is due only to the ethnocentric self-congratulation of the West. So if it appears to you that the foragers were left behind, they did not progress, it was just the Western society beating itself up on and congratulating itself that we have done a good job. Rather than accumulate material goods, these societies are guided by other values, leisure, mobility, and above all, freedom. So the forager societies had other qualities that they were looking for. They were looking for leisure, they were looking for mobility, they were looking for freedom, and all of these were kind of there because they were choosing to do this. Viewed in today's context, of course, not every aspect of the essay has aged well. So yeah, so not everything makes sense now. While acknowledging the violence of colonialism, racism, and dispossession, it does not thematize them as heavily as we might today. So they have not discussed a lot of things about colonialism, racism, and dispossession. Rebuking evolutionary anthropologists for treating present-day foragers as left behind by progress, it too can succumb to temptation to use them as proxies for the Paleolithic. So we are looking at, we are tempted, or the essay was tempted to treat them as sort of a symbol for the Paleolithic age. Yet these characteristics should not distract us from appreciating Sahalin's effort to show that if we conjure new possibility, we need to learn about actually inhabitable words. So what he's saying is that Sahalin's effort that if we bring in more possibility, there are more words possible, right? And so therefore, the author is saying that kudos to Sahalin for showing us this possibility, right? That he has brought about this, even though the essay may not have everything, may not discuss everything, and yet there are certain things that it has discussed and that it has brought to our mind and our eye. Let's quickly look at the questions also. So question number 1 says the author of the passage mentions Galbraith's affluent society. Why does he mention this affluent society? He has mentioned it in the 4th paragraph here, guys, with its titles not. So he's trying to show you that the original of affluent society was bringing this critical perspective that Galbraith had shown to bear or to in the contemporary world. Okay, so let's take a look at our options. Show how Sahalin's views complemented Galbraith's criticism of the consumerism and inequality. Well, this is what is mentioned. He brought this critical perspective to bear on the contemporary world. So he has taken the affluent society's perspective and put it onto the modern world. So 1 is a good choice. Does he bring it to document the influence of Galbraith's cynical views on modern consumerism on Sahalin's analysis of prehistoric society? No, the author does not mention affluent society to document the influence of Galbraith's cynical views on modern consumerism. So not to. The author doesn't, let's take a look, option 3. The author mentions the affluent society to show how Galbraith's theories refute Sahalin's thesis. Well, this is not happening. They are talking of the same thing, and therefore 3 is incorrect. The author of the passage mentions Galbraith to contrast the materialist nature of contemporary growth paths with the pacifist content way of living among the forager. No, he doesn't talk about the affluent society to show the contrast. He actually wants to show them to show the similarity with between Galbraith and Sahalin's perspective. So therefore, clearly, only one can be the right answer. Look at question number 2. The author mentions Tanzania's Hazda community. They have been mentioned in the second paragraph that the foragers had other options. So here we wanted to say that the Hazda could have become farmers because they were surrounded by farmers, but they did not want to. So they rejected the alternatives that they had. So here, very beautifully, option 4 says that forager communities' lifestyles derived not out of ignorance about alternatives, but from their own choice. Very clearly, the answer was mentioned. Look at option 1, how pre-agrarian societies did not hamper the emergence of advanced agrarian practices in contiguous community. Well, this was not the reason why the author has mentioned the Hazda community. Look at how two vastly different ways of living and working were able to coexist in proximity for centuries. We don't know if they were coexisting in proximity for centuries and therefore not two. And 3, that hunter-gatherer communities' subsistence level techniques equipped them to survive well into contemporary times also was not mentioned here at all. So therefore, the best answer here will be option 4. Let's look at the third question. The author of the passage criticizes Sahalin's essay. Why does he criticize? He says that not every aspect of the essay has aged well. So the last paragraph is where he is criticizing this essay. While acknowledging the violence of colonialism, racism, and dispossession, it does not thematize them as heavily as we might today. So he's saying that he does talk about them, that he doesn't give them the required attention that we would do today. So therefore, the author is criticizing Sahalin's essay for failure to supplement its thesis with robust empirical data. No, he doesn't talk about that. He says there is empirical data. Critique of anthropologists who disparage the choices. No, the author does not do this. He does not criticize Sahalin's essay for critiquing the anthropologist. Criticizing Sahalin's essay for outdated values regarding present-day foragers was also not mentioned. 4 is the correct answer. Very clearly, the cursory treatment of the effects of racism and colonialism on societies. So correct answer 4. Let's look at the last question of this set. We can infer that Sahalin's main goal in writing his essay was. What was his main goal? The idea why he has written this essay was because he wanted to show societies that were consumerist, that there were other choices, and that there are societies that have chosen to go with alternative views and that they have done so well. So 1 is a very good choice. Hold a mirror to an acquisitive society with examples of other communities that have chosen successfully to be non-materialistic, right? It did so through the classical anthropological move of showing that radical alternatives to the reader's life really exist. So this is where he has mentioned this very beautifully. His purpose was not to counter Galbraith's pessimistic view. He is not countering Galbraith's view at all. To put forth the view that despite egalitarian origins, economic progress brings greater inequalities. Yes, he has mentioned economic progress bringing greater inequality and social hierarchy, but that is not the reason why he has written this essay. And look at option 4, highlight the fact that while we started off as a fairly contented, egalitarian people, we have progressively degenerated. No, he does not. He is not writing this essay to show that we started off as contented people and that now we have degenerated. So not 4 also. All right, so the correct answer here will be option 1. That brings us to the end of the second passage. We'll continue with the rest of the passages shortly. Thank you so much. So this is the third passage of CAT 2023 slot 1. This is on Indian Ocean literature, literature that is centered around the Indian Ocean and does not have a very West European perspective to it. The number of words were 506. The Flashkin Kid grade level was 8.5, so it was a fairly easy read. The passage has been sourced from the conversation.com, and the area of writing or style of writing is literary criticism. There were 1 detailed question and 3 interpretative questions in this passage. Let's get started with the passage first. For early post-colonial literature, the world of novel was often the nation. Post-colonial novels were usually concerned with national questions. Sometimes the whole story of the novel was taken as an allegory of the nation, whether India or Tanzania. This was important for supporting anti-colonial nationalism, but could also be limiting, land-focused and inward-looking. So he starts by talking about the early post-colonial literature after the colonial period. Post-colonial means after the colonial period. This literature, the world was most often about the novels were only about the country, about the nation. They would talk about the national issues, the national question. The novel was considered, the story of the novel was an allegory of the nation. It was a story of the nation, okay, symbolic representation. So we were talking of anti-colonial emotions, sympathies, and those were all part of this kind of writing. Now, it could be limiting also, obviously, because it was very land focused and very inward looking. The perspective was very to the country, limited to the country. So we start with, in the first paragraph, what is post-colonial literature all about? Okay. We say that it is very inward looking. It is the story of the nation. Okay, that is what the first paragraph says. The second paragraph says, my new book, Writing Ocean Worlds, explores another kind of the world of the novel, not the village or nation, but the Indian Ocean world. So now the author starts talking about what he has written. So he says that he's written a book called Writing Ocean Worlds, which is talking about the Indian Ocean world. The book describes a set of novels in which the Indian Ocean is at the center of the story. It focuses on novelists Amitav Ghosh, Abdul Razak Gumrah, Lindsay Colon, and Joseph Conrad, who have centered the Indian Ocean worlds in the majority of their novels. Their works reveals a world that is outward looking, full of movement, border crossing, and south-south interconnection. They're all very different, from colonially inclined Conrad to radically anti-capitalist Colin, but together draw on and shape a wider sense of Indian Ocean space through themes, images, metaphors, and language. This has the effect of remapping the world in the reader's mind as centered in the interconnected global South. So now the author talks about writing this book, Writing Ocean Worlds, in which he talks of these novelists who have written only about the lands around the Indian Ocean. So their writing is about the Indian Ocean space. So all the countries, all the lands that are focused towards the Indian Ocean, these 4 writers have talked about this. So there is Amitav Ghosh, there is Lindsay Colon, there is Joseph Conrad, and there is Abdul Razak Gumrah. So these are all. So they're all talking about. So what they have done is they have remapped the world in the reader's mind as centered in the interconnected global South. So it is now the South that they are talking about. The world is centered towards the global South. The Indian Ocean is a term used to describe the very long-lasting connections among the coasts of East Africa, the Arab coast, and the South and East Asia. These connections were made possible by the geography of the Indian Ocean. For much of history, travel by sea was much easier than by land, which meant that port cities very far apart were often more easily connected to each other than to much closer inland cities. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests that what we now call globalization first appeared in the Indian Ocean. This is the interconnected oceanic world referenced and produced by the novels in my book. So in the third paragraph, he talks about these countries which were connected through the Indian Ocean. Why? Because they're all on the ocean side. They're all connected. They're the part of the Arab world. They're part of the African world. And they're part of South and East Asia. And they're all centered through the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is the connecting entity, right? So they're all connected and very beautifully. And the author has spoken about this world in his book. Okay, so author's book is focused on this world. Okay. For their part, Ghosh, Gunra, Colin, and even Conrad reference a different set of histories and geographies than the ones most commonly found in fiction in English. So generally, English fiction is about European fiction or the American fiction. Excuse me. These people are talking of a world, a set of history, a set of geography that is not related to Europe or to the US. Those commonly found ones are mostly centered in Europe or in the US. They assume a background of Christianity and whiteness and mention places like Paris and New York. Do away with that. The novels in my book highlight instead a largely Islamic space, so mostly Islamic, feature characters of color and centralize the ports of Malindi, Mombasa, Aden, Java, and Bombay. It is a densely imagined, richly sensory image of a southern cosmopolitan culture, which provides for an enlarged sense of place in the world. So in the fourth paragraph, we talk about this world where we're not talking of Europe, we are talking about these different histories and geographies. That of these countries that are in Africa, that are in Asia, they're mostly Islamic. The people are colored. There are many port towns that we talk about, but these are towns of the southern world, right? This remapping is particularly powerful for the representation of Africa. In the fiction, sailors and travelers are not all European. African as well as Indian and Arab characters are traders, nakhodas, dhow ship captains, runaways, villains, missionaries, and activists. This does not mean that Indian Ocean Africa is romanticized. No, they're not making it very fancy and very sweet. Migration is often a matter of force. Travel is portrayed as abandonment rather than adventure. Freedoms are kept from women and slavery is rife. What does it mean is that the African part of the Indian Ocean world plays an active role in its long, rich history and therefore in that of the wider world. So in the last paragraph, the author talks about the importance of Africa. He says that while these writers are writing, when they write, the representation of Africa is much bigger than what has been represented earlier. We talk of African people, the characters are African, the stories are African. The problems are also discussed. It's not that the problems are not discussed. We have considered the writers talk of the problems also, but it is making Africa have a larger role to play than it has had in any of the fiction earlier or in any of the European centered or American centered fiction. So Africa now comes into its own in a way. Why? Because it has a larger role in fiction in the Indian Ocean world. Very interesting, very easy to read passage, very beautifully written. Let's look at the questions also. So question number 1, on the basis of the nature of the relationship between the items in each pair below, choose the odd pair out. What is the odd pair out? Let's take a look. Indian Ocean novels are outward looking. Yes, we have said that. Their work reveals a world that is outward looking. So they have said this. So this cannot be the odd pair out. Please pay attention. Post-colonial novels, border crossing. Well, the post-colonial novels were they talking about different countries? I will put a star on this, okay? Indian Ocean world, slavery. Were the Indian Ocean worlds all about slavery? Yes, we have said that. Slavery is rife. Rife means it's everywhere. So yes, one more pair that is mentioned. So I will eliminate it as the as not an odd one out. Post-colonial novels, anti-colonial nationalism. Well, yes, this was important for supporting anti-colonial nationalism, again mentioned in the passage. So very correct, so cannot be the odd one out. So the odd one out answer then, guys, has to be option number 2. And that now becomes your correct answer. Let's look at the second question. Which one of the following statements is not true about migration in the Indian Ocean world? We have said migration is often a matter of force. Do you see that in this last paragraph? Right at the end, we have said that, right? So that's one. The Indian Ocean world's migration networks connected the global north with the global south. Well, interestingly, the passage did not speak about the global north. It said we'll connect the south with the south, right? We spoke about remapping of the world as centered in the interconnected global south. Do you see this here in the second paragraph, the last portion? So one is not true, and therefore ideally it should be the answer. Okay, so I'll put a tick, but I'll also check my other options. Option number 2 says the Indian Ocean world's migration networks were shaped by religious and commercial histories of the region. Yes, the migration was a matter of force. You had to do it. Why? There were reasons for that. So 2 is something that's true in the passage. So I will eliminate this. Geographical location rather than geographical proximity determined the choice of destination for migrants. Well, the passage has said that people were connected from port to port. Travel by sea was much easier than by land, which meant that port cities very far apart were often more easily connected to each other than much closer inland cities. So people were connecting to each other. That was the location thing. So again, this is true and therefore cannot be the answer. Migration in the Indian Ocean world was an ambivalent experience. You did not enjoy it. It was a matter of force. So if something is a matter of force, you have to do it. You may not enjoy it. So yes, ambivalent experience, so true and therefore not the right answer. So the only one that is not true about in this passage would be option 1. Let's look at the next question. All of the following claims contribute to the remapping discussed by the passage except. So which one doesn't contribute? Or we can look for the ones that contribute and eliminate whatever is left. So let's take a look. So option number 1, the world of early international trade and commerce was not the sole domain of white Europeans. Well, yes, this is so clearly mentioned in the passage that these people were doing business, right? A lot of business was happening in the Indian Ocean world, right? And therefore, see, historical and archaeological evidence suggests that what we now call globalization first appeared in the Indian Ocean. So there was an interconnected world, right? So this was not the sole domain of the white Europeans. Is true. And this is contributing to the remapping. So contribute. I will put 1 as something that contributes. Look at the, so I'll have to also eliminate it. Look at 2. The global south as opposed to the global north was the first center of globalization. Okay. Please pay attention. Again, we have said that globalization first appeared in the Indian Ocean, right? That means this was the first center, correct? It very beautifully says that. Very beautifully that it first appeared in the Indian Ocean. So if it first appeared in the Indian Ocean, well, I've got my answer here. Okay. So something that is again a claim that contributes. So I'll have to eliminate this also. Indian Ocean novels have gone beyond the specifics of national concern to explore rich regional past. Yes, we have spoken about that. We have spoken about the rich regional, the densely imagined, richly sensory image of a southern cosmopolitan culture, which provides for an enlarged sense of place in the world. This is what these novels are talking about. So that also contributes. So cannot be my answer. Let me look at option 4. The cosmopolitanism originated in the West and traveled to the East through globalization. Well, this is something that is not mentioned as a claim that contributes to the remapping of the world focused towards the Indian Ocean. This is saying that the Western world was what helped everything. That is where cosmopolitanism has originated. So this is the one that will not contribute and therefore will be your answer. Okay, so 4 definitely an answer. Let's look at the last question of this set. All of the following statements, if true, would weaken the passage's claim about the relationship between mainstream English language fiction and Indian Ocean novels, except. Okay, so I am saying weaken plus except. So what I can do is I can find all the ones that weaken the claim and make that my answer. Okay, so find the weakens, eliminate those, and then whatever remains will be my answer. Or I can also look at something that strengthens the author's idea. So anyway, let us look at which all will weaken the passage's claim and then eliminate those. Now, what is the passage's claim about the relationship between mainstream English language fiction and Indian Ocean novels? Well, mainstream English language fiction was centered towards what? It was centered towards the US and Europe. Okay, that was the mainstream English language fiction, right? While Indian Ocean novels were focused on areas around the Indian Ocean, right? So Africa, Asia, and the Arab world, right? So that is what we are saying. So this is what the author has said. And I want to weaken this. I want to say that this is not correct. Okay, so let me find out which will weaken, and then whatever will remain, we'll take that to be our answer. Okay. Most mainstream English language novels have historically privileged Christian white male experience of travel and adventure. Okay, now, does this weaken the passage's claim about mainstream English language fiction and Indian novels? It doesn't. It actually doesn't do anything, right? So I'll have to put a star on this. That most of the mainstream language have the Christian white male experience of adventure and travel. Well, yes, but that does not show the relationship and that does not weaken the relationship. So I put a star on this. I'll come back to this. The depiction of Africa in most Indian Ocean novels is driven by a post-colonial nostalgia for an idyllic past. Now, if we depicted Africa in the Indian Ocean novels by this nostalgia for a perfect world, but did we do that? Did we have the perfect world? No. And did we depict it through the perfect world? No. So if the author says it was depicted through an perfect world image, then this will weaken our author's argument. So 2 definitely weakens what the author has said. We have said the world is focused towards Indian Ocean, right? We have said that the Indian Ocean novels are providing this beautiful image. They have given you the reality, right? Let's look at the third option. Very few mainstream English language novels have historically been set in American and European metropolitan centers. Well, this is false because the passage does not say that. The passage says that everything in the most of the books were focused on Europe or in the US, right? Those commonly found ones are mostly centered in Europe or the US. But these, the ones that we are talking about, the Indian Ocean novels, they are focused on Indian Ocean. So again, this is weakening the author's argument. So eliminate this also. Look at the fourth one. The depiction of Africa in most Indian Ocean novels is driven by an Orientalist imagination of its cultural crudeness. Well, again, in the Indian Ocean novels, we have not done this, right? So this will also weaken our vision or what the author says about the Indian Ocean novels. or the relationship between the mainstream fiction and Indian Ocean novels. So if option 2, 3, and 4 are all weakening this concept that the Indian Ocean novel actually presents a picture of the Indian Ocean, of the world as connected through the Indian Ocean, as the reality being presented through the reality of Africa, of Asia, and so on, then options 2, 3, and 4 are all weakening that, right? So the only one that doesn't weaken, which actually gives you the real view of what the original novels were like, the mainstream English language fiction, that is option 1. And therefore, option 1 will become your answer. Okay, I hope you've been able to understand. Thank you so much. I'll shortly take you to the next passage. So this is passage 4 for CAT 2023, questions 13 to 16. Now, this one was about geographic determinism. The number of words were 481. The FK grade was 11.6, the toughest in the set. The reading this passage was slightly more difficult than reading the rest. The passage was sourced from jareddiamond.org and it was a passage based on geography. There were 2 detailed questions and 2 interpretation questions here. So let's take a look at our passage and then the question subsequently. Many human phenomena and characteristics such as behavior, belief, economies, genes, income, life expectancies, and other things are influenced both by geographic factors and by non-geographic factors. So human phenomena and characteristics are influenced by geography and other factors. Geographic factors mean physical and biological factors which are tied to geographic location, including climate, the distribution of wild plant and animal species, soils, topography. Non-geographic factors include those factors subsumed under the term culture, other factors subsumed under the term history, and decisions by individual people. So human characteristics are dependent on 2 things. They're dependent on geography and they're dependent on culture and history. Okay, that's what the passage is saying. So first paragraph, that. The difference between the current economies of North and South Korea cannot be attributed to the modest environmental differences between them. So now you come to an example of this thing. They are instead due entirely to the different government policies. At opposite extreme, the Inuit and the other traditional people living north of the Arctic Circle developed warm fur clothes but no agriculture, while equatorial lowland peoples around the world never developed warm fur clothes but often did develop agriculture. So see, people in different places who could have been similar are very different because of government policy. People who are living in different places have done similar things or may not have done similar things, depending on where you are. Now, the explanation is straightforwardly geographic, rather than a cultural or historical quirk unrelated to geography. People who are living in Arctic develop warm fur clothes. People who are living on equator do farming. Simple. Aboriginal Australia remained the sole continent occupied only by hunter-gatherers and with no indigenous farming or herding. Here the explanation is biogeographic. The Australian continent has no domesticable native animal species and few domesticable native plant species. So what are they going to domesticate? Instead, the crops and domestic animals that now make Australia a food and wool exporter are all non-native, mainly Eurasian species such as sheep, wheat, and grapes brought to the Australia by overseas colonists. So whatever is there in Australia is not their own, or Aboriginal Australia didn't have anything other than hunter-gatherers. Whatever they have done now has come from abroad, has come from foreign. So therefore, now the second paragraph gives you examples. And what are the examples they're giving you? They're giving you examples of the Koreas, North and South Korea. They give you the example of Arctic and equator, right? They give you example of Aboriginal Australians. So they've given you examples that depending on where they were living, either the geography, okay, right? or biogeography, they have caused these differences. Okay, so that's the second paragraph. Today, no scholar would be silly enough to deny that culture, history, and individual choices play a big role in many human phenomena. Scholars don't react to cultural, historical, and individual agent explanations by denouncing cultural determinism, historical determinism, or individual determinism, and then thinking no further. But many scholars do react to any explanation invoking some geographic role by denouncing geographic determinism. So all scholars accept that history, culture, and choices play a big role in human phenomena, right? They don't denounce these, that, oh, this is cultural determinism, or this is only historical determinism or individual determinism. And then they do not stop thinking about it. They consider it. But the minute some geography comes in, they denounce geographic determinism. They say, oh, this is only by geography you are saying something. So now scholars, in the third paragraph, we talk about scholars denouncing geography as the reason for something. So they denounce geographic determinism. They are saying that, oh, geography cannot determine everything. Several reasons may lie this widespread but nonsensical view. So see, author gives you his view. It's a nonsensical view, but he gives you reason. One reason is that some geographic explanations advanced a century ago were racist, thereby causing all geographic explanation to become tainted by racist association in the mind of many scholars other than geographers. But many genetic, historical, psychological, and anthropological explanations advanced a century ago were also racist, and yet the validity of newer non-racist genetics, etc. explanation is widely accepted today. So one reason that he says why people are not taking the geographic explanation is because earlier they were racist, right? And because they were earlier racist, people still consider them to be racist. And that's why they say, oh, no, not geographical, this thing. But they don't apply this to other subjects. So here is the hypocrisy that we are talking about. We bring it out. Another reason for reflex rejection of geographic explanation is that historians have a tradition in the discipline of stressing the role of contingency, a favorite word among historians, based on individual decision and chance. Often that view is warranted. Most of the time it is accepted. But often too, that view is unwarranted, or a lot of times it may not be required to be accepted. The development of warm fur cloth among the Inuit living north of the Arctic Circle was not because one influential Inuit leader persuaded other people to adopt warm fur clothes for no good environmental reason. No, they had a very sensible reason, right? So in the fifth paragraph, we talk about historians attributing everything to decisions and choices on chance. So historians say everything is due to a decision or due to chance and not due to geography. Well, that's not necessary. A third reason is that geographic explanations usually depend on detailed technical facts of geography and other fields of scholarship. Most historians and economists don't acquire the detailed knowledge as part of the professional training. So the third reason why people don't accept geographic explanations is because they don't understand the technicality of geography. So it is a technical subject. So technicality of geography is not understood. And because they don't understand, therefore they deny it outright. Okay. So this passage is talking about how geographic factors are important, but are not accepted well by historians and other people who are studying different things. Okay, so that's our passage. Let's look at our questions also. So question number 1 says, all of the following can be inferred from the passage except. So individual diktat and contingency were not the causal factors for use of fur clothing in some very cold climates. Okay, I'll put a star on this one. Individual diktat and contingency were not the causal factor for the use of fur clothing in some very cold climate. That somebody told someone to do this, and contingency, which means choice and chance were not the reason. Well, this is mentioned in the passage, so that is why I'm putting a star on this one. Okay. Look at the second one. Several academic studies of human phenomena in the past involved racist interpretation. But okay, now this one is mentioned somewhere in the passage that some earlier responses were very racist, right? So see here in the third last paragraph, one reason is that some geographic explanations were racist, thereby causing all geographic explanation to become tainted by racist association. Okay, so we can take this that several academic studies of human phenomena would have involved racist explanation. So this can be inferred. Okay, look at 3. While most human phenomena result from culture and individual choice, some have biogeographic origin. Well, again, we have spoken about this in the second paragraph, where we said that the Australian continent had some Aboriginal Australia only had hunter-gatherers and no indigenous farming or herding. And the reason was biogeography. So even though most phenomena result from culture and choice, some have biogeographic origin. Well, this can be inferred also. Let's look at the fourth choice. Agricultural practices changed drastically in the Australian continent after it was colonized. Yes, because earlier it was just hunter-gatherers. The Aboriginal Australia remained the sole continent occupied only by hunter-gatherers. But much later, when the colonizers came, what did they do? They brought sheep, they brought fruit, and they were all brought by the colonists. So that means that agriculture changed drastically, didn't it? From the time that the Aboriginals were there to this time. So this can also be inferred. The only thing which says individual diktat and contingency were not the causal factor for the use of fur clothing in some very cold climates, that will be your correct answer. So because this is very clearly mentioned, and so therefore cannot really be inferred. So one is the correct answer here. Let's look at the second question. The author criticizes scholars who are not geographers for all of the following reasons, except. Okay, so let us see why does he criticize these people. So their outdated interpretation of past cultural and historical phenomena. Okay, the author criticizes scholars who are not geographers for one of these reasons. Well, does he criticize them for their outdated interpretation of past cultural and historical phenomena? I'm not really able to find this. So I'll put a star on this. I'll come back to this. The importance they place on the role of individual decisions when studying human phenomena. Well, yes, this the author has mentioned. Today, no scholar would be silly enough to deny that culture, history, and individual choice play a big role in many human phenomena. Okay, but many scholars do react to any. So this is something that he will criticize. Okay, so I'll write C here and I'll cut it out. Their labeling of geographic explanations as deterministic. Again, the third paragraph, we see, but many scholars do react to any explanation invoking some geographic role by denouncing geographic determinism. And then he says the reasons may underlie this widespread but nonsensical view. So anyone who uses this, that they explain anything by denouncing geographic determinism, the author is going to criticize them. So therefore 3 is criticism and therefore cut it out. Their rejection of the role of biogeographic factors in social and cultural phenomena. Well, any author or any person who rejects biogeography, then again the author is going to criticize them, because very clearly he has given us this example of Australia being the sole continent occupied by only hunter-gatherers. And he says this explanation is biogeography, right? So therefore, this also he will criticize somebody who rejects the biogeographic factor, because author is accepting the biogeographic factor. So therefore 4 is also something that he will use to criticize. Only one the author will not say anywhere. He has not even mentioned outdated interpretations of past cultural and historical phenomena. He doesn't mention that. No outdated interpretations are mentioned. And therefore, here the correct answer is going to be 1. Let's look at the next question, question number 3. The examples of Inuit and Aboriginal Australians were offered in the passage to show. Why did you give the example of the Inuit and the Aboriginal Australian? Well, the Inuits, they gave the reason that very quickly, let's take a look. The Inuit and other traditional people living in the north of the Arctic Circle developed warm fur clothes, but no agriculture. Then Australian Aboriginals, they said that they were just hunter-gatherers and no indigenous geography, right? So he says that there are certain reasons why these people are the way they are, okay? So despite geographical isolation, traditional societies were self-sufficient and adaptive. Well, this is not the reason why he's given you the Inuit and Aboriginal examples, right? So therefore not 1. How physical circumstances can dictate human behavior and culture? Yes, somebody who was living in Arctic Circle developed warm fur clothes. Somebody who was living in Australia where there are no plants or domesticable native animals or plants, they didn't domesticate, they were hunter-gatherers. So 1 could be a good choice. How environmental factors lead to comparatively divergent paths in livelihood and development? Well, he does not give you divergent paths, or at least not for how these environmental factors are leading to comparatively divergent paths. So not 3 also. Human resourcefulness across cultures in adapting to their surroundings. Again, this is not an example of human resourcefulness. The only thing it was an example of was the fact that there are geographic or biogeographic reasons for being the way you are, right? So therefore, very beautifully, option number 2 will be the correct answer. How physical circumstances can dictate human behavior and culture. Let's look at the 4th question. All of the following are advanced by the author as reasons why non-geographers disregard geographic influences on human phenomena, except there. Okay, so author gives you these reasons why non-geographers disregard geographic influences. Which one he does not advance as a reason? So let's look for reasons first and then we'll eliminate those. Okay, the reasons were given in the very last 3 paragraphs. Several reasons may underlie this silly view, right? So let's take a look. Disciplinary training, which typically does not include technical knowledge of geography. Well, the very last paragraph did talk about this. The historians and economists don't acquire detailed knowledge as part of the professional training. So mentioned. So this is a reason, therefore cannot be my answer. Look at the second one. Lingering impressions of past geographic analyses that were politically offensive. We have spoken about racist views, right? That some geographic explanations advanced a century ago were racist, thereby causing all explanations to become tainted by racist association. So 2 is also a reason, so therefore cannot be my answer. Look at 3. Belief in the central role of humans unrelated to physical surroundings in influencing phenomena. How one human would be, contingent and agent in doing something. Again, he has mentioned that here, a favorite, the role of contingency based on individual decisions and chance. So he does mention that. So 3 is also a reason, therefore cannot be my answer. Dismissal of explanations that involve geographical causes for human behavior. Well, he does not give as a reason, and therefore 4 has to be the correct answer. All right, I hope you've been able to understand all the questions and all the passages from this CAT paper. We will now shortly proceed to the VA section. Thank you so much. So these are the sentence placement questions in the cat paper, slot 1. The first source was Eureka Alert and the second source was the Philosopher's Magazine. So these are the two sources from where the passage has been taken. Question number 17. The discovery helps to explain archaeological similarities between the Paleolithic peoples of China, Japan, and the Americas. What is this discovery that we are talking about in the sentence? Let's take a look at the passage. The researchers also uncovered an unexpected genetic link between Native Americans and Japanese people. So what is this unexpected link between Native Americans and Japanese people? During the deglaciation period, another group branched out from northern coastal China and traveled to Japan. So there is a group that branched out from northern coastal China and traveled to Japan. We were surprised to find that this ancestral source also contributed to the Japanese gene pool. So these people who went out from northern coastal China were contributing to the Japanese gene pool, especially the indigenous Ainus. Okay, so I know very clearly blank 2 cannot have anything. Also blank 1 cannot have a sentence because these sentences are so well connected. Now, we were surprised to find this ancestral source also contributed to the Japanese gene pool, especially the indigenous Ainus, says Lee. Okay. They shared similarities in how they crafted stem projectile points for arrowheads and spears. Okay. What were the similarities? Archaeological similarities. The discovery helped to explain archaeological similarities between the Paleolithic people of China, Japan, and Americas. What was the similarity? They crafted stem projectile points for arrowhead and spears. So 3 can be a good place to fit this sentence. Okay, I'll put a star on 3. 1 and 2 cannot be, but I'll check for 4 also. So they were creating these stem projectile points for arrowheads and spears. This suggests that Pleistocene connection among the Americas, China, and Japan was not confined to culture, but also to genetics. So how they are crafting all of this, there is a very beautiful connection. So then there cannot be a sentence in option 4. So therefore, option 3 is the only one where you will be able to fit this sentence. So correct answer, option 3. Let's look at question 18 also very quickly. This philosophical cut at one's core beliefs, values, and way of life is difficult enough. So I'm saying there is a philosophical cut of some type, which is difficult enough. Okay, so 2 things. It is difficult enough. And this philosophical cut, these are 2 things that we have to pay attention to. The experience of reading philosophy is often disquieting. It's disturbing. When reading philosophy, the values around which one till now has organized their life may come to look provincial, flatly wrong, or even evil. So whatever your life philosophy was, it may now sound very rural. Provincial means very rural, wrong, or maybe very bad. When beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible, new beliefs, values, and ways of life may be required. So see, blank 1 doesn't take anything. Both the sentences before and after the blank fit so beautifully. So when beliefs previously held as truth are rendered implausible, new beliefs, values, and way of living may be required. What's worse? Oh, what's worse than what? Than acquiring this? No. What's worse is worse than difficult enough. So take a look. This philosophical cut at once. So everything that you believe till now is now rendered implausible. So this cut at your core belief, value, and way of life is difficult enough. What is worse is that philosophers are admonishing each other also. So see, isn't 2 such a beautiful place to connect? So the sentence prior to 2 says that all your beliefs are rendered impossible. Beliefs are rendered implausible, rather, not impossible. And then he says, this cut, this philosophical cut is difficult enough. Right? Says it's difficult enough. And then he goes to the next sentence and says, but what's worse is that the philosophers are scolding each other. So what a beautiful tight set we have found, and therefore 2 has to be the correct answer. I don't even want to go ahead, but I'll still read the rest of the passage also. Sometimes philosophical writing is even strictly critical in that it does not even attempt to provide an alternative after tearing down a cultural or conceptual citadel. The reader of philosophy must be prepared for the possibility of this experience, that they will not give you a choice. So this experience is that there is no alternative. So connected. So 3 cannot have anything. While reading philosophy can help one clarify one's values or even make oneself conscious for the first time of the fact that there are good reasons for believing what one believes, it can also generate unremeditated doubts that is difficult to live with. After this philosophical cut will not come again. So the best answer, yes, is 2, strongly, certainly. Okay, so that is the end of the para statement placement questions. We'll come to the next type of question shortly. So the odd sentence question made a comeback in this paper. Last year they were not there in CAT 2022. CAT 2023 they did come back. Let's take a look. So 2 passages. One is from NOBA, the other source was unknown. Question number 19, here we go. So having an appreciation for the workings of another person's mind is considered a prerequisite for natural language acquisition, strategic social interaction, reflexive thought, and moral judgment. So you have to know some person's mind to understand many, many things. It is a theory of mind, though some scholars prefer to call it mentalizing or mind reading, which is important for development of one's cognitive ability. Okay, so we are talking of a theory of the mind. Some people call it mentalizing or mind reading. Though we must speculate about its evolutionary origin, we do have indications that the capacity evolved sometime in the last few million years. What is this capacity that we are talking about? We'll have to find out. This capacity develops from the early beginnings in the first years of life to adults' fast and often effortless understanding of others' thoughts, feelings, and intentions. So you start off by developing this capacity very, very quickly, right? And often effortlessly. Let's look at the 5th one. One of the most fascinating human capacities is the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mental state. Okay. Now, if you look at these sentences very clearly, we are talking of the capacity to understand another person, understand another person's mind. And the sentences that are talking about is 5, right? 4. I'm not giving you an order, by the way. So 5 is talking about this human capacity. 4 is also talking about this capacity, which starts developing very early and helps you understand the other person. We're talking of understanding the other person. Then the 3rd sentence also talks about this capacity, and the first one also talks about this capacity. So 5, 4, 3, and 1 all talk about this capacity of understanding other person as a prerequisite for learning, social interaction, thinking, and moral judgment. The statement number 2 talks about a theory of the mind, which helps in development of your cognitive ability, your ability to understand things, right? So 2 then has to be the odd one out here. Okay, so that's going to be your answer. Let's look at question number 20. So question 20, very interesting. In English, there is no systematic rule for naming of numbers. After 10, we have 11 and 12, and then the teens, 13, 14, 15, and so on. Even more confusingly, some English words invert the numbers they refer to. So the number 14 puts the 4 first, and then even though it appears last. Okay, so we're talking of numbers. I've started getting my theme. It can take children a while to learn all these words. Okay, and understand why 14 is different from 40. So this is talking about children and how they learn. For multiples of 10, English speakers switch to a different pattern, 20, 30, 40, and so on. If you didn't know the word for 11, you would be unable to just guess it. You might come up with something like 1 teen. Okay, very interesting. So now if you look at this, the overarching theme here is number and their names. So number names, right? And what sentences talk about number names? Sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 4, and sentence 5. All of them talk about number names. How do you number? Only sentence 3 talks about children and how much time they need to learn these words. And therefore, 3 has to be our odd sentence out. Okay. So that's our odd sentence out. We'll shortly go to the next type of questions. So the parajumbles, of course, there were 2 parajumbles this time. One from The Guardian and the other from California Management Review. Let's take a look at these questions. Question number 21. What precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive to certain kind of audience? What is this unusual element that makes something so attractive to some person? It might be a particularly savage or unfathomable level of depravity, immorality. Very often it has something to do with the precise amount of mystery involved. So what is this that has the level of depravity, right? Unsolved and perhaps unsolvable cases offer something that ordinary murder doesn't. Oh, we're talking of murder. Why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others logged into permanent obscurity? Oh, I have found my introduction. We are talking of murder, and we are talking of murder cases that some will come back again and again, and others nobody will care. So, of course, the introductory sentence, the problem or the issue that we're discussing is statement 4, right? We start off with that. So why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others logged into permanent obscurity? Why? So what precisely are the unusual things that make a particular case so attractive to a certain kind of audience? So what is that thing in a case that makes it very attractive so people want to examine it again and again? So statement 4 starts out an idea. Okay. Statement 2 kind of builds it, right? Builds that, okay, what are these unusual elements that we are talking about? Then statement 3 starts giving you a reason. So there might just be some amount of depravity. What is that inner desire of immorality? Oh, what is this that makes this murder so interesting? How have they been killed? Right? That depravity is there. So statement 2 now starts answering the question that we have asked in statement number 1. What is that unusual element that makes it attractive? So he says it might be a level of depravity. So answer to this one or statement 1 happens here. And then finally we say unsolved and perhaps unsolvable cases offer something that ordinary murder doesn't. So what is this precise amount of mystery that is involved? Unsolved cases, unsolvable cases. There's something that ordinary murder doesn't have. Oh, it's an open and shut case. Who wants to study that? I want to study the case where the murderer was not found even after 5 years, right? So the unsolved ones and the unsolvable ones, now he tells you, okay, these are the ones that people are looking at. So sequence, of course, very beautifully, 4, 1, 2, 3 kind of makes it very, very visible and clear. So that's the first one. Let's look at the second parajumble also, question number 22. Algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI models have resulted in much larger impact, adversely affecting far larger groups of people. So if you have a bias in an AI model, it will have a much larger impact. Okay, more people are going to be impacted. Although algorithmic bias is a popular term, the foundation of such bias is not in the algorithms, but in the data. The algorithms are not biased, data is, as algorithms merely reflect persistent patterns that are present in the training data. So these are persistent patterns. So whatever data is given, that is what is visible in the algorithm. So the bias is not in the algorithms, but in the data. Despite their widespread impact, it is relatively easier to fix AI biases than human-generated biases, as it is simpler to identify the former than to try to make people unlearn behavior learned over generation. So AI bias is easier, even though it has a widespread impact, okay, than the human-generated ones, but it's still easier to resolve, okay. The impact of biased decisions made by human is localized and geographically confined. But with the advent of AI, the impact of such decisions is spread over a much wider scale. All right. So the question, what are we talking about? We're talking of the impact of AI, of human decisions, biased decisions, and how due to AI, the impact of biased decision is spread over a much wider scale. So I start with statement 4, which gives you this, that the impact of such decisions is spread over a much wider scale. So this is my author's claim in statement number 4. And then we start talking about this. So algorithms that are hosted on the internet are accessed by many people. So if there is a bias in the AI model, there is a much larger impact. Okay. And then he says, even though algorithmic bias is the term, it's not really, the bias is not in the algorithm. It is a data bias. So then he starts by talking about AI bias. Then he says it's actually not AI bias, actually it is data bias. So he actually now gives you the real reason. Okay. So he comes to statement number 2. And then he says, so he's spoken about this data bias. And then he says, despite, even though it has a widespread impact, it is relatively easier to fix these biases. Why? Because you can identify these much easily as compared to making people learn behavior. So again, 3 becomes the last statement, which kind of wraps it up. So 4, 1, 2, 3 is the correct answer here. So that brings us to the end of the para jumbles, both of them done. So these are the para summary questions for CAT 2023 slot 1. One from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and the second question from UNESCO. So here are our 2 sources. Let's look at these questions. So question number 23. Colonialism is not a modern phenomena. Start by that. World history is full of examples of one society gradually expanding by incorporating adjacent territory and settling its people on a newly conquered territory. Very simple. You start shifting into another territory and just start putting your people there. In the 16th century, colonialism changed decisively because of technological developments in navigation that began to connect more remote parts of the world. So they had boats and ships and they could go to remote parts of the world. And because they could, the colonization happened. The modern European colonial project emerged when it became possible to move large numbers of people across the ocean and to maintain political control in spite of geographical dispersion. So European colonialism started happening because they were able to move people and they were able to control maintain political control. The term colonialism is used to describe the process of European settlement, violent dispossession, and political domination over the rest of the world, including Americas, Australia, and parts of Africa and Asia. So what are we saying? We said colonialism, we're talking of colonialism. We say it is an old phenomenon. Okay. We say you move your people. That's what colonialism is. Okay, from one place to another. Okay. What was the European colonialism? European colonialism. Okay. Why did this happen? Because you were able to move people over oceans and you were able to keep political control. Okay, so you had political control. And then he says, European settlement everywhere in the world was called colonialism, right? So that European settlement, violent disposition, that means you threw out the people who were there. Okay. And then finally you became political rulers. So political dominion. This was what European colonization was. Okay. Let's take a look at our options. So colonialism surged in the 16th century due to advancement in navigation, enabling British settlements abroad and global dominance. Well, the passage was not just about British settlement. It was about colonialism, European colonialism. So keeping this so narrow is incorrect, and therefore one cannot be the right answer. Look at 2. Technological advancements in navigation in the 16th century transformed colonialism because, yes, you were moving your people, but now it changed, enabling Europeans to establish settlement and exert political dominance over distant regions. Well, yes, this is so good. I'll put a star on this. Look at 3. As a result of development in navigation technology, European colonialism led to the displacement of indigenous populations and global political changes in the 16th century. Well, was it global political changes that happened in the 16th century? Only in the 16th century? Or is it that in 16th century it changed decisively? So again, 3 is not a perfect answer and therefore I'll eliminate it. I'll look at 4. Colonialism conceptualized in, no, was it conceptualized in the 16th century? No, it is something that is not a modern phenomena. So this portion of the statement is incorrect. Allowed colonizers to expand their territories, establish settlements and exercise political power. Well, the second part of the statement is correct, but the first part, that conceptualized in the 16th century, is incorrect, and that's why I can't take 4. So of options 1, 2, 3 and 4, only option 2 is something that is a suitable answer for me. And that's why I will take 2 to be the right answer here. All right, let's look at the last question, question number 24. Manipulating information was a feature of history long before modern journalism established the rules of integrity. So we are saying manipulating information was very long, historical record. A record dates back to ancient Rome when Antony met Cleopatra and his political enemy Octavian launched a smear campaign against him with short, sharp slogans written upon coins. The perpetrator became the first Roman emperor, and fake news had allowed Octavian to hack the republican system once and for all. Amazing. But the 21st century has seen the weaponization of information on an unprecedented scale. So we've made information a weapon. Powerful new technology makes the fabrication of content simple, and social networks amplify falsehoods peddled by states, populist politicians, and dishonest corporate entities. The platforms have become fertile ground for computational propaganda, trolling, and troll armies. Let's take a look at this very quickly. So number 1, we said manipulating information is very old, right? It's not new. Okay, so is very old, right? Then the second thing we talk about is this, how Octavian used a smear campaign, right, to win, to defeat Antony and Cleopatra. Okay, he's found the best solution. Then 21st century sees information as a weapon. Okay, we say, it has seen weaponization of information on an unprecedented scale. So information as a weapon, that has never happened before, is now happening. The scale is so big. Then we say powerful new technology. There is technology that allows you to create fake information, fake news very easily. Okay. And social networks peddle this falsehood. So social networks, they amplify it, they increase this news. So they amplify. If one person is dead, you say 50 people. Okay. And what are they amplifying? Anything, that any sort of falsehood can be amplified. So these platforms, the social media platforms, what are they? They are tools for propaganda. They are tools for trolls and for trolling machinery, right? So that is what this passage is all about. It is talking about information, okay? It is basically talking about disinformation. What is disinformation? It is false information that you use to deliberately spread falsehoods, okay, about people. So that's disinformation. So passage is about disinformation. Okay, let's take a look at the answers and see what is the correct answer. So Octavian used fake news to manipulate people and attain power and influence just as people do today. Well, this comparison we are not really doing. One, that's one problem. Two, also the passage is not about Octavian. It is about manipulation of information. So one is a very limited example of the passage and therefore cannot be the summary of the passage or the essence of the passage. Look at the second option, disinformation, which is mediated by technology today. So you're spreading information, false information, by using technology, okay, is not new and has existed since ancient time. Well, it is something that has existed. Okay, sounds good to me. I'll put a star on two. People need to become critical of what they read, since historically weaponization of information has led to corruption. Well, the passage was not people-centric. Please understand that the passage was not speaking through the voice of the people or telling people what they should do. And therefore, option 3 cannot be the essence of the passage. Okay. Let's look at option number 4. Use of misinformation for attaining power, a practice that is as old as the Octavian era, is currently fueled by technology. Okay, wonderful. So the passage is saying, the author is saying here that if you use misinformation to grab power, okay, and something that is as old as Octavian era, okay, all right, is currently fueled by technology. We are using technology to grab power. Everything that we have said in the passage is mentioned in statement number 4. And if it is, then statement number 4 should be my right answer. Statement number 2 is incomplete. It doesn't have everything that we are talking about. And that is why between 2 and 4, 4 is a better choice of option than 2. Okay. So that brings us to the end of this slot 1 paper of CAT 2023. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful.